So I used to head the training department. So if I needed a trainer, where would I go to? I'd go to a university. And whoever the smarter and the brighter and the more articulate guys, you go and hire those guys. So to a large extent, the industry is also responsible for the bleeding that is happening. But we've been giving whatever approvals to a huge number of engineering colleges without the necessary infrastructure. And yeah, the branding dollars, and in all fairness to Mr. Premji, he has a large foundation. There are more than 200 employees there, which are on his personal wealth. There's nothing that comes from the Wipro Corporation per se, and he's made an endowment of $2 billion, the largest donation done by any single individual in India. He has a Azim Premji has a foundation that is focused on the primary school education. The primary school education, there's a huge problem in India. 50% of the teachers don't show up. 60% of the schools don't have infrastructure. So they're trying to address all these issues, and they're trying to create a university which will mass produce teachers for the primary school system.
They can add something.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, the Premji Foundation has developed several metrics also to evaluate performance levels in primary schools, and one of the projects that we are funding, Shikshana, use the Premji Foundation model for several years to evaluate the performance in these primary schools before intervention, after intervention. Premji Foundation are leaders in this area.
Definitely, in terms of philanthropy, that's one foundation which has in many ways shown the way. Although I would say that Tatas have been the leaders. They have genuinely created huge amount of progress in the country. So they would be the leaders, not to say that Mr. Premji is not. Premji is a great guy. I mean, he's $2 billion of personal wealth is a lot. And his discipline, as far as his personal discipline is concerned, there is nothing from the company that is ever used for his personal use, including in building a house. The company civil engineers are not put to use. The separate contractors who are brought in for the architecture and everything else, and not even a little bit of anything to do with Wipro is used for anything that is personal to him. But that's a little digression about Wipro. Yeah.
Can you tell us briefly about what are some of the values that Premji has left his stamp on Wipro? You know, some of the cultural aspects of Wipro attributable to him.
Personal attributes, one is, I think, a huge amount of discipline. So he is a very disciplined soul. For him, everything happens and happens every day. There is no let up. If he has to be in office at 8 o'clock, he is in office at 8 o'clock. And the other is frugality. He used to drive a Ford Escort and then a Toyota Corolla. Whereas anyone with that kind of wealth in India would drive nothing less than a Mercedes. So, and it is a fact. This is a fact, because my Ford Escort used to be parked and his Ford Escort also used to be parked. There's very little difference. This is way back in 2002, 2003, that time. And even today, he used to be on a Toyota Corolla till, at least I've seen that in 2008. So, very frugal. And then as for anyone who has created so much wealth in his life, there is also this attribute that I find is for Mr. Premji, his Bahamas, his golf, his home, or his holiday, everything is Wipro. So there is no difference between work and relaxation, because work is relaxation. But that happens to all these guys who are so possessed and who have created so much wealth in their lifetimes. Whether it's an IIT or Azim Premji. For us, you see, we are always thinking we will cool off or we will wind down is work for them. If they don't work, then they, I think, get wound up.
If I can make a quote, Dr. Jagdish Sheth once told me the Bangalore trips to meet with Premji is one of the draining thing for him. because Mr. Premji is always asking for questions, trying to soak up like a sponge. He's always putting into real work. That shows his curiosity, learning.
Yeah, his curiosity is unparalleled because I remember as a training head, he made only one visit to the training department. And from 9 to 12, he was asking 101 questions. So much so that my boss would haven't asked me as many questions about training as he did. And he was so many levels above that activity. And my boss, I'm sure, had never asked me those many questions as he did. So that curiosity is there. Frugality, discipline.
So I have a question. On the outsourcing side, most of the Indian companies are doing the service-oriented. Are there any companies transforming the product side of it? Especially, you said like Ramco started, timing may not be the right. When the outsourcing wave started, they were doing the product. Are there any companies transforming the product in terms of software as a service or data centers? I don't see anything from India side.
Right. As far as pure play products is concerned, I think there is a challenge. To straddle two strategies simultaneously, a product strategy and a services strategy, where the metrics, the measurements, the pace and rhythm of work are totally different, I think is not possible. So to be a product player and to be a services player is difficult. To be a productized services player, yes, it is possible. And I think all Indian companies are making progress. I think they could do a lot more. To have ready-to-use frameworks which are reasonably well defined and they need to be made specific to the user organization or to the client context. I think we need to do more, but I think something significant is happening. On the product side, I do not have first-hand experience, but one of my Vadwa, Vivek Vadwa, we were having a chat. Vivek Vadwa has been fairly active. I don't know if you've been reading his blogs. If you haven't been, I think you should. He's been making a lot of noise that the entire visa regime is actually hurting the US infinitely more than it is hurting the Indian companies. He's been taking up a lot of, what should I say, he's been a fairly active campaigner there. Plus he's been doing a lot of analysis as to what's happening in the industry. How do IT clusters work? Have innovation clusters worked at all in countries and stuff like that? So quite a thought leader. He works in Duke, Berkeley, and I think in Harvard or one of these places, and in MD. So he comes to Atlanta fairly regularly. So he was mentioning that 2 years back when he was addressing how to build products and how should a product strategy be, there were hardly 50 to 100 people attending his talk, some 50, 70 guys. But this time when he was there were 1,000 people who came for his talk. And everybody had some product or the other going. So there is the small sector where people feel that services is really not their cup of tea. Bright young guys who are very possessed. That lot seems to be emerging. If I were to go by what he had to say, it seems to be a very strong trend emerging out of India. Still not visible, but hopefully this is a trend that will gather a lot more momentum and a lot more visibility. And what we need to see is $1 or $2 billion acquisitions of dreams that people have created, or something which has a revenue of 50 million but gets bought for $1 billion, and that will change the complexion of things, the product play in India. But that change, I believe, is happening, although I haven't seen it myself. I'm going by evidence that Vivek Vadwa provided, and he is a very trusted and a very competent person.
So on the same continuation of my question, typically here, VCs are big backbones for some of these startups. People will take risks and do the startups. That's how all the West Coast big companies started. What kind of activity going on in India in terms of VCs?
Now, VC activity in the past was related to services companies. So a lot of services companies did spring up because of VC funding. So I don't know how active that play is in the product place, but I would guess that VCs would not be far behind. Vivek Wadhwa sees 1,000 guys coming and listening, and he believes that most of them were doing some significant product play. I would guess that there would be a VC play too. All the large VC companies are there. The Sequoia Capital and the other guys, they're all there. But they have traditionally been funding the services play. So there has to be that one big thing that needs to happen. A big hotmail kind of an event needs to happen out of India and things will change.
Suraj, you spoke a little bit about convergence sometime ago, and also how companies are asking Indian companies to come in more thought leadership. Also heard about hiring from the universities here. How do you bridge the gap? In my experience, companies are really looking more for subject experts or thought leadership experts, domain experts. How do you bridge that gap by actually getting people who are functional experts in the area so they can actually get a seat at the buyer's table or the business team? How does Wipro bridge that gap? When you hire people fresh from college, that's a long
You can't
time.
do that.
Right.
So what Wipro, all these companies have done is they've got now a significant investment into consulting. So Wipro has something called Wipro Consulting Services. Infosys has set up a separate company called Infosys Consulting. I think they merged it back into the parent company. I think they merged it. Okay. And so does TCS. TCS always had a very strong consulting arm. In the 80s and in the early 90s, they had a strong consulting arm that used to do a lot of work. I used to work for Tata Steel at that time, and they used to have their guys doing all the strategy work. Somewhere in the mid-90s, they got a brainwave that this is all a digression. So they disbanded the consulting group, which was, on hindsight, was it was not a great move. But then they restored all that in 2004, 2005. And they, of course, have the advantage of a large slew of Tata companies to work with. So that is where the consultants can really bear their teeth and they can really get on to projects. And they have existing brand names and existing companies where they could do their work. So that is what is gathering a lot of momentum. So we are hiring, and most of the Wipro consulting guys, a lot of them are local folks, or they are Indians who've been in the US for a long, long time. Typically the Indians who came, did their MS or their MBA and have worked in American companies. So that is what these companies are trying to do. So hiring from campus will really not get you those 10-year-old or the gray hairs and the expertise related to a particular domain. That has to be got from the marketplace. And the challenge really is that the consultants we hire from the marketplace should feel that this is a great home for me. And that is where the cultural bridges are, they really need to be built. And we are heading towards the convergence, but we are still some distance away.
So given the recent downturn, what sectors is Wipro focusing for growth? Where do you see growth in the short term? In the US or around the world?
Short-term growth will be the usual, the banking, finance sector. If of course those guys, their money spends, the corrections happen within 6 months. If there is money available within 3 months, the spend starts happening. If the markets are not doing well, there is a fear that the markets may not do well. And the BFSI spending will again undergo a little significant cut. If that happens, I think the Indian companies will all be challenged. So everybody believes the pharma, healthcare is the big place to be in. They have still not made as much inroads as they should have, except for Cognizant, which has done a great job there. Then is the utilities business, which is underpenetrated, largely because of regulators and significant internal challenges to these companies. And that's where everybody is betting on, and we see growth. But BFSI for now is the one where in the short term and the long term, everybody is kind of hoping that that will be a bust. this whole spurt which started in end 2009 was largely driven by the BFSI growth.
When I came to your recent open house, third one or whatever it might be, you were showcasing mobility